Namaste everyone from Tiruvannamalai, and Happy New Year. As you can see, I'm sitting up on my rooftop here with Runachala, the sacred mountain, behind me. It's really an amazing spot here, and I've been in a period of silent retreat time, and a couple of days I felt that I wanted to send you a message like I did last year, make a video. And so I've been writing quite a bit, and I wrote this kind of essay over the last couple of days, which I'm going to read to you. So this is for your consideration for the new year, and I just want to say it's been an amazing past year, 2019. It's been the most ecstatic, full, inspiring year of the project. I mean, we've grown quite significantly. The commitment and understanding of many of you has deepened profoundly, and you know, we're 9 or 10 years into this experiment now, and I really feel that we're becoming a force to be reckoned with in terms of spiritual awakening, which is deeply inspiring. And so, but as I always say, we're just getting started. So what's possible for 2020? Well, who knows? I'm just greatly looking forward to it, and I want to encourage you all to dive ever deeper with me into the fire of the heart. And I hope what I'm going to read will be fuel for that process for you all. So, I want to ask you all a direct question. Do you believe that God, the Great Spirit, consciousness itself, is pervading you, whoever you are, right now? Now, I've no doubt that all of you, as you're part of this project, will probably say yes. But believing that, because you may have experienced it at some point in the past, doesn't really mean that much. So my next question is, do you really intuitively know that? Before thought, regardless of what you're feeling emotionally in any moment. Is the direct, tangible awareness of God, of a greater reality, your intuitive experience in this moment? And if it is, then is that sense of living communion with that greater reality your regular or even constant intuitive experience? And if you do not have any intuitive sense right now of a greater reality that transcends your individual body-mind, and if you're only rarely convinced of the reality and the truth of that presence, it just simply means that regardless of all the meditation, the retreats, the meetings, and any spiritual study that you've done so far, your spiritual practice has not yet amounted to a fundamental shift. A fundamental shift into what we could call spiritual realization. And by realization, I mean making it real, making your awakening real. Let me put it another way. Do you still fundamentally experience yourself to be the separated personal psychological self that your mother and father named Teresa, Sergio, Raquel, Pedro, Sandra, David? Of course, I could add 60 other names. Do you generally presume yourself to be that individual that you always presumed yourself to be? Or has there been a radical and unmistakable shift in your sense of identity? And despite the fact that you may have had many profound glimpses of awakening or extended interludes of awakened consciousness in which you have heard and seen and felt the truth of the teaching, the truth of your own true nature, if you have not made that pivotal shift at the core of your being, then you have not yet authentically begun to literally embody and live the teaching for real, which of course is what we're all interested in. That's why this is called the Awakened Life Project. In the last men's meeting, which I joined from here in Tiruvannamalai, I passionately called for the men to make themselves available for this shift. And one of the things I said at the end of the meeting was a quote from the Bhagavad Gita, which is the kind of Hindu Vedanta holy book, like the Bible in Christianity. And in the Bhagavad Gita, there's Krishna, who represents God or the Guru, and there's Arjuna, who's the disciple. And Arjuna is involved in an upcoming civil war, in terrible strife and struggle, and he wants to renounce the world. And he calls on Krishna to ask him if he will accept him, as a renunciate, so he can escape and renounce the world. And then Krishna commands him. He says, "No, you must remember me and fight." Now in the Bhagavad Gita, literally what Arjuna has to do is fight a civil war. But of course this is also a metaphor for the challenge of living an awakened life in the world, and in a profoundly ignorant and unenlightened world. So Krishna is saying that you can do anything and you will be free as long as you remember me. And of course the me is capital M, which transcends the personal self. So I want to explore a bit what it really means to remember me in this context. Now, as you all know, the foundation of our spiritual orientation in the Awakened Life Project is the direct path. And the direct path is based on the assertion of and our surrender to the deepest truth of our being, which is that we are always already free. In other words, the goal, if you like, of our spiritual pursuit is always already the case. It's already here. And of course that undermines the whole pattern of seeking for some particular state or experience. Another way of putting it is that who we really are is what they call in India Sat Chit Ananda, which means being consciousness bliss. Being consciousness bliss is your true nature. You are that. However, it must be understood that this assertion of being consciousness bliss, or remember me, and our availability to the ultimate truth of this freedom and our prior unity, does not equal the realization of that truth. Directly intuiting the non-dual truth, which we could say is having a glimpse, right, of the truth of who we are as transcendental consciousness, is not the same as the ordeal of making it real, of realization. And this is what I call the awakening process in my book, In the Fire of the Heart. So awakening itself, or enlightenment itself, is always already the case. It's always immediate, it's always available. It's outside of time. But there's to actually realize that as an individual body-mind, for our individual body-mind to come into alignment with that truth and be able to express it, of course we need to transcend the illusion, the very strong and embedded illusion of being a separate personal self. And that's where the process comes in. And the process requires everything from us. It requires great commitment, real preparation, and the liberation of our attention from the self-contraction of the ego. And thus the liberation of our attention and our energy from the bondage to the limiting structures of our conditioned tendencies. This is the work of discipline, of practice, and of devotion that releases energy and attention from the ego bond. So without this supportive exercise of intentional self-giving, self-surrender, the awakening process remains nothing more than a kind of psychological and verbal exercise of the waking mind. In other words, if you're just trying to convince yourself, oh, I'm already free, or you're practicing some form of self-inquiry, oh, who am I? Oh, I'm not this, I'm not that. If you're just approaching spiritual life like that without any discipline, practice, devotional context, well, it doesn't really penetrate very far. It is only when energy and attention are set free by the process of practical discipline, self-inquiry, true meditation, and heartfelt devotion to the great mystery of the divine reality, that the awakening process can enter profoundly into the real source of life and attention. It is because of the absence of these profound practices and supportive disciplines that the true way of the awakening process often gets reduced to what Adidar called the talking school. Now, some of you might not be aware of this because the Awaken Life Project is all that you really know spiritually. But the talking school is the primary offering, really, that of Western teachers in terms of spiritual awakening. These kind of teachers, all they tend to do is emphasize you are consciousness, or emphasize being in the now. Or emphasize, if they're Buddhists, they tend to emphasize mindfulness and being mindful, being present. If you think of most of the popular Western teachers of spiritual awakening, I mean, you've all heard of Eckhart Tolle, for sure, everyone has. But then there's other teachers, some you might have heard of, like Adyashanti or Muji, Rupert Spira, Byron Katie, Gangaji. Many of them are great teachers, and they have some authentic awakening and transition. And they can talk the talk and communicate that immediacy of awakening to people to different degrees. But they generally do not provide through their teaching, and nor do they demand through their transmission what is really required to truly walk the talk. And so the true depth and power of spiritual awakening tends to get diluted and diminished in the West, which is hardly surprising because most spiritual seekers are looking to be consoled, and to feel better. They don't want to have their egos burned up. So when I say walk the talk, I mean communicating and embodying the great demand for self-sacrifice, which is the all-consuming fire of the heart. Now, sacrifice means to make sacred. Sacrifice is the willingness to not only ignite, like these talking school teachers might do, but to burn up in the fire of the heart. Not many seekers are truly interested in that because of the implications. They're so great, they're so all-consuming. It is also in the talking school that we hear many of these teachers emphasizing the non-necessity of spiritual practice and the non-necessity of a spiritual master or guru or teacher, or the non-necessity of a collective culture of participation, of a sangha. And many of these teachers are very popular. Their teachings are popular, they write books, they give presentations, but they don't want to create any kind of culture of awakening around themselves, a sangha. The reason they can so easily dismiss the importance of a teacher, of a guru, or the guru principle, let's say. And by guru principle I mean the teaching function that spontaneously manifests in some individuals who've authentically awakened. Not necessarily everyone who's awakened. But the reason they can so easily dismiss the guru principle, the importance of it, is because they've already dismissed the importance of the whole process of spiritual practice. All that is necessary for them, they think, is this kind of analytical effort of meditation and self-inquiry and this kind of trick of remembering, oh, no, I'm consciousness, I'm not this, I'm not that, I'm not the ego. Just remember that you're always already free, you see. So I'm mentioning this partly to give you a bit of an education, but also for you guys to become more aware if you're kind of using the teaching in any way that's kind of superficial in that sense, in your relationship with your own mind, or when you're dealing with each other in a hold-on or whatever. If you just resort to, I will just remember that you're just really already free, or that's not really who really are. I mean, that can be real if it's real, or it can just be a kind of intellectual understanding that doesn't really amount to much. But even if it is real, transformation is not going to occur unless you're willing to embrace this aspect of practice and devotion. So be aware if any of you tend to reduce the teaching to this kind of superficial remembrance. That remembrance will only transform you if you're also willing to embrace the discipline, practice and devotional surrender to the Great One that always already transcends your psychological self.